We often remember the great generals of World War II as singular heroes, master strategists who led the Allies to victory. We see them in black and white photos, their faces stoic, their reputations unblemished. But the truth is far more complex. The pressures of total war magnified not only their genius, but also their flaws.
That old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
Today, we're not going to talk about the universally beloved commanders. Instead, we're going to explore the most controversial generals of the war, men whose egos, failures, and complicated choices made their legacies just as much a subject of debate as their victories. This isn't a story of heroes. It's a story of flawed men in an impossible conflict. Douglas MacArthur, the ego general. Let's start with General Douglas MacArthur. To many, he was a living legend, a man who believed in his own destiny. Behind his bold speeches and trademark aviator glasses was a general whose big ego often got in the way of real military decisions. His first major controversy came at the very beginning of the Pacific War. Just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces targeted the Philippines. Despite receiving a 12-hour warning, MacArthur's Air Force, one of his most critical assets, was still on the ground at Clark Field. A devastating Japanese air raid destroyed nearly half of his bomber fleet before it could even get airborne. It was a crippling defeat that left the islands vulnerable and exposed one of MacArthur's most profound failures. As his forces were pushed to the brink, MacArthur was ordered by President Roosevelt to withdraw. On March 11, 1942, he famously escaped in a PT boat, leaving his men to fight on. It was from Australia that he gave his iconic radio address, promising the Filipino people, "I shall return." This quote is immortalized as a symbol of hope, but to his critics, it was the ultimate act of theatrical self-preservation. While his men endured the horrors of the Bataan Death March, MacArthur was safely behind enemy lines. It would take over 2.5 years and an entire island-hopping campaign for him to finally fulfill his promise, solidifying a legacy of both heroism and deep-seated controversy. Bernard Montgomery versus George S. Patton, the clash of egos. Next, we have a rivalry that defined the Western Front. On one side, the brilliant but notoriously arrogant British General Bernard Montgomery. On the other, the equally brilliant and equally arrogant American General George S. Patton. They couldn't have been more different, and their clashing personalities led to some of the war's most heated moments. The tension first boiled over during the invasion of Sicily in 1943. Montgomery, with his meticulous and cautious approach, was given the main objective of taking Messina. Patton, in a support role, was meant to protect Montgomery's flank, but Patton couldn't stand being second fiddle. He launched his own rapid, almost reckless advance across the island. His goal wasn't just to win, it was to beat Montgomery to Messina. He did so, but in his zeal, he also created a major diplomatic incident. During this same campaign, Patton's ego led to one of his biggest scandals, the slapping incidents. He visited 2 different field hospitals and, upon finding soldiers suffering from battle fatigue, what we now call PTSD, he accused them of cowardice and physically assaulted them. This incident enraged Eisenhower, who forced Patton to apologize. While Patton's men loved him for his aggressive leadership, these moments of instability showcase the deep-seated flaws beneath the flamboyant exterior. As for Montgomery, his cautious nature would prove equally controversial. His plan, Operation Market Garden, was a massive airborne assault designed to seize a series of bridges and end the war by Christmas 1944. The plan, however, was critically flawed. Montgomery insisted on a narrow ground advance along a single highway, and he dismissed intelligence reports of German armored divisions in the area. The result was a catastrophic failure at the Arnhem Bridge. with thousands of Allied paratroopers either killed, wounded, or captured. Montgomery's rigid confidence had cost the Allies dearly, proving that his cautious, centralized command style could be just as dangerous as Patton's recklessness. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, and his complicated allegiance. Finally, we turn to the most complicated figure on our list, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. To many, he was the Desert Fox, a brilliant and honorable opponent who fought a clean war, untainted by the Nazi regime. But this is the Rommel myth, and it's a version of history that was carefully constructed after the war. Rommel was undoubtedly a master tactician, particularly in tank warfare. His campaigns in North Africa were legendary and earned him the respect of his Allied adversaries, including Patton and Montgomery. This chivalrous image was reinforced by Allied propaganda to explain their own defeats, and later used by post-war Germany to rehabilitate the image of the Wehrmacht. But the reality was that Rommel was a favored officer of Hitler himself and personally benefited from the Nazi regime. He was a committed soldier to his country, but that loyalty eventually put him on a collision course with the Führer. Rommel grew increasingly disillusioned with Hitler's leadership and the deteriorating war effort. He believed the war was lost after D-Day. This disillusionment led him to a fateful decision. Rommel was implicated, though not as an active participant, in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. When his involvement was uncovered, Hitler was faced with a dilemma: publicly execute the most beloved general in Germany, or quietly force his suicide. On October 14, 1944, two generals arrived at Rommel's home with an ultimatum: take a cyanide pill and be given a hero's funeral, or face a show trial that would result in the torture and execution of his family. Rommel chose to die with his honor, saving his family in the process. He died a hero to his country, a victim of the very regime he once served. MacArthur, Patton, and Rommel were not perfect men. Their stories remind us that history is not a simple narrative of good versus evil. These generals were a blend of brilliance and arrogance, tactical genius and personal flaws. They were complex figures whose legacies are a testament to the fact that in war, a general's greatest enemy can sometimes be his own reputation. Omar Bradley, the GI's general who hesitated. General Omar Bradley was known as the GI's general for his quiet confidence and ability to connect with the average soldier. He was trusted by Eisenhower and was seen as a calming contrast to the flamboyant Patton. Yet, his most significant command decision remains a point of deep historical contention: the Battle of the Falaise Gap. By August 1944, the Allies had a golden opportunity to trap and annihilate a massive German army in Normandy. The plan was a classic pincer movement. Canadian forces would drive down from the north, and Patton's Third Army would drive up from the south. The two forces would meet and close the Falaise Gap, trapping over 150,000 German soldiers. Bradley's role was to command the American forces making the southern advance. However, he grew concerned that Patton's fast-moving tanks would collide with the advancing Canadians. To avoid friendly fire, he ordered Patton to halt his advance, leaving a crucial opening in the gap. The Canadians, for their part, also moved slowly. This hesitation proved disastrous. Thousands of German soldiers and valuable equipment were able to escape the pocket, a failure that arguably prolonged the war and cost thousands more lives. To this day, historians debate whether Bradley's caution was a prudent decision or a tragic strategic blunder. Mark Clark, the conqueror of Rome. Mark Clark was a highly capable general who commanded the American Fifth Army in the grueling Italian campaign. But while his forces fought their way up the Italian boot, his personal ambition came to overshadow his strategic judgment, leading to one of the most controversial decisions of the war. As Allied forces closed in on Rome in June 1944, the German 10th Army was in a desperate retreat. The Allied High Command, including General Harold Alexander, saw a clear opportunity to encircle and destroy the German army. The plan was simple. The American Fifth Army would swing west to cut off the German escape route, while the British would push forward from the east. However, Mark Clark had other ideas. He was fixated on being the first to enter Rome, a feat no Allied commander had achieved. Defying direct orders, he diverted his forces from the planned encirclement and instead drove straight into the city. His move was a massive public relations success. He was hailed as the liberator of Rome. But it was a military failure. The German 10th Army, which was on the verge of being annihilated, was given a critical window to escape. They lived to fight another day, retreating to a new defensive line that would hold up the Allied advance for another 10 months. Clark's victory in Rome came at the cost of countless Allied lives. Georgy Zhukov, the Butcher of the Red Army. When you think of a decisive World War II general, Georgy Zhukov is at the top of the list. He was the most brilliant Soviet commander, the man who defended Moscow, broke the siege of Leningrad, and finally captured Berlin. Yet, his legacy is deeply stained by the horrific human cost of his victories. Unlike Western generals who had to answer to their governments and public opinion, Zhukov answered only to Stalin. This gave him the freedom to achieve his objectives with a chilling disregard for the lives of his men. Critics refer to his tactics as human wave assaults, where he would throw masses of soldiers into battle with little regard for strategy or support, overwhelming the enemy through sheer numbers. The casualties under his command were staggering, with some battles incurring losses in the hundreds of thousands. Perhaps the most horrifying example is the Battle of Berlin. Zhukov's frontal assault on the Silo Heights, a fortified German position, resulted in a staggering loss of 30,000 Soviet lives in just 4 days. Despite these losses, Zhukov's ruthless efficiency delivered victory. After the war, his immense popularity and power made Stalin paranoid. He was demoted, stripped of his honors, and exiled to a minor command, a clear sign that his loyalty to the state was always secondary to his own life.